the election we had here a couple of days ago will take, it will take a little while to truly, fully, and comprehensively make sense of that. I don't want to even take an attempt to go about that here. But what I would like to do in this kind of conversation that already has started, and that's kind of not only happening here in the United States, but as I know from friends kind of all over the place, really, to offer kind of three perspectives that really loop that conversation back into our ULAB journey here and into some of the core concepts. And if we go to the first image here, that's really the starting point, right? When we started ULAB, we started kind of with this process kind of, and this kind of intention, kind of learning from the emerging future, learning and leading from the emerging future. With the current reality here, the emerging future more on the right-hand side, and then, the journey kind of that takes us from one to the other as a journey that requires us to open mind, open heart, open will. Of course, what we also covered is that very often in our real context, we see the exact opposite going on, right? We see mechanisms that are amplifying the freezing of the mind, the heart, and the will. And if you kind of just take the example of the recent campaign and election process here, denial, so one party in climate denial and election results denial as well, while the other one is in denial of having a candidate who is completely incapable to do another cycle of this. So you have, I think we have denial on many levels right now, and I could kind of go down this list here. I think I don't need to, but we see a lot of these kind of entrenching kind of our various media bubbles and so on and so forth. So we see a lot of these phenomena of this other story here amplified, particularly through social media, which is running on a business model that is maximizing user engagement by amplifying these emotions, right? Fear, anger, and hate, and is incentivizing the spread of disinformation rather than factual information. So that's a little bit the context here. Given that context, what is ours to do? I think ours to do is how we covered is accessing our humility. How is it that we move these contexts into these deeper processes of leaning into the emerging future? Humility, equanimity, which is really accessing our not knowing, and deeper listening, and accessing our discomfort and sensing capacities. And the third one that we mentioned has to do with stillness. But in the current, in the view of the current moment, I think kind of one that really has my attention is the one that I marked yellow here, hope, right? Yes, it's kind of not reacting, so accessing our non-reactive self, which is accessing our presence, but also accessing our hope. And I have been always inspired by the Czech late president and poet Václav Havel, who once said that hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well. That would be optimism, right? But hope is the certainty that something makes sense regardless of how it turns out. And that kind of hope, I believe, is very much a central scarce resource right now that we as a community can tap into, and that will be required really for us to move forward. So that's perhaps the first lens, right? The first lens is that we are experiencing an intensification of absencing, kind of a huge amplification of everything up here And that requires us to deal with that, to cultivate our humility, our equanimity, kind of basically our capacity to not go too high or too low in our emotions, but to stay steady. And our stillness, or our deeper sources of presence and hope. Secondly, the second concept that I want to just quickly remind you of, and that we could use as an angle, as a perspective of sense-making today, is the notion of the social field, right? That in everything social, we have the visible part that's kind of above the ground here, and we have the invisible part that's below the ground. And of course, one question is, why is it that we have democratic processes that and decision-making that in many cases are actually hurting the material interest also of the people that are voting for it. So kind of that is increasing exclusion and pain. And I would say, and why is it that we have an election conversation that is not based on facts, that is not based on inquiry, but often on misinformation? And what I would say is, when you look at democracy from the viewpoint of the social system, right, the social field, the democratic kind of processes is what you see above the ground. But a democracy without the capacity to cultivate the social soil is not a democracy. A democracy without the capacity to access these deeper capacities. And what is that in the end? It is the process of reflection, of becoming aware. It's the process of deepening our listening in the way we have been practicing in Europe. It's the capacity to move from just downloading to debate, and from there to dialogue. It's the capacity to sense and connect with the emerging future, to co-imagine a future that we want to create together, and then to learn by doing, and to come up with decision-making processes together. So that's I would say, that's the second lens, right? And the second lens has to do essentially with, the first one is intensification of absencing, which is really calling for our capacity of deeper grounding and of accessing our sources of hope. The second one, right, so I want to call DINO, right? DINO stands for democracy in name only. And democracy in name only means it's only the stuff above the ground that's democratic. But if a democracy is working without a quality soil, which means without deep listening, with quality level of conversation, where based on facts, kind of we inquire into all the different perspectives that are relevant into a situation, then we're really undermining the foundations of democracy. So it has to do everything to do with media. It has everything to do with social media. And I think it's a much deeper issue that we face than, let's say, what's on the ballot between left and right. And so the calling, kind of the implication for us is really cultivating the social soil. And that's why what in small ways we do here in ULab, hopefully can be a contribution to our larger evolution there. Now, the third one has to do with what I would say what was on the ballot, right? So, and let me just call that, the third one is the item, the lens number 3 is the missing third. So when I went to vote on Tuesday, there were basically 2 main options. One was more of the same, right? Status quoism. And so you can say that was the first option. The other option was, again, right, to summarize that, to make our community great again.
No.
And it's orienting ourselves back to a time that no longer is. Now, those are two options. But what was missing? What was not there? Leaning into the emerging future. So that is the missing third. And to me, it is not kind of on this axis between, you could say, left or right, or conservative or progressive, but it's kind of on a different axis that has to do with connecting with our deeper sources, with cultivating the social soil that allows us to, grow a different ecosystem up here. And that's what I believe is what we try to contribute towards. And of course, if we now move, we heard Valencia and other examples, if we move into a period that will be more and more chaotic, right? And that's probably also, certainly also what we are going to experience here. The question is, but how does that really work? And that's where I want to just remind us of this concept that we also mentioned right at the outset, which has to do with this. When a system is far from equilibrium, small islands of coherence in a sea of chaos have the capacity to lift the entire system to a higher order. So, in other words, the implication here, what is mine to do on the third level has to do with islands of coherence that over time we can evolve into ecosystems of coherence. So that's an offer. It's just three different lenses of sense making on the current situation. So seeing this as a symptom of an intensification of absenting, which is calling on us to cultivate our inner grounding in terms of humility, in terms of equanimity, to emotionally not get derailed, and in terms of hope. Dino, right, as the state of democracy being really under attack, I would say, because what's happening in the entire political process is, an undermining of these soil conditions. And lastly, the missing third, how is it that we can be an embodiment of leaning into an emerging future that truly relates to the deeper sources of innovation that we all feel are possible today.